Hello gladiators and glory hounds, my name is TippySky, and in their ongoing quest to bring all 148 champions up to modern standards in the lore department, Riot have released some lore updates for Draven, Alistar, and Jax. Some of the changes are minor, simply bringing old champions into modern standards, and some of them are a little bit more extensive than that. So in this video, let's take a look at these three champions, what their lores used to be, how they have been changed, and have a little bit of a discussion about whether or not the changes that have been made are an improvement or will allow for something interesting to maybe happen to these characters in the lore at some point when Riot, gets around to telling stories about any of them. Now, curiously, all three of the characters who've had their bios updated are some description of gladiator or pit fighter or master at arms, which, if I was a conspiratorial man, I might say has something to do with the recent release of Set, who is of course the owner of a coliseum where masters at arms regularly face each other. Now, there are no immediate reasons to think that Riot are planning any kinds of interactions between Draven, Set, Alistar, and Jax, and even if they were, well, this is Riot Games, and it might be quite some time before any of it comes to fruition, if at all. So, let's dive into the changes that have been made to the most recent of the three champions that have been changed, Draven, the glorious executioner, and yes, I am required by law to say it that way. Now, I called Draven the youngest of the three champions, but he's hardly a spring chicken. He was released in 2012. Despite having been in the game for 8 years, though, and being a character who was explicitly designed to play into League of Legends' then-current internal fiction where the League of Legends is a gladiatorial blood sport, Draven has never had any substantial exploits in the lore or any major changes to them. He arrived in the League pretty much fully formed, and even in this new update, very little has been done to really change him. In Draven's original lore, he's the brother of Darius, who follows his brother into the military but eventually grows tired of the rigmarole of soldier life and builds for himself a career as an executioner, hence his title of the Glorious Executioner. Rather than making it a drab affair where a man in a black hood brings down the axe on the neck of a defeated prisoner, Draven turns the whole thing into a game and a spectacle. He tells the prisoner to try and escape him and then kills them with a throw of his spinning axes. This flair for the dramatic makes Draven popular and indeed very, very famous, and the constant feeding of his ego through the spectacle of celebrity heightens Draven's ambitions to the point where he decides to put his skills on display for the entire world as a champion in the League of Legends. Now, when the 2014 lore retcon hit and the League of Legends itself was excised from the lore of League of Legends, as it happens, Draven's lore didn't really need much changing because, well, rather than have him be a champion in the League of Legends, you can just say, oh, he's a champion in Noxus who has now decided to have global ambitions somehow. So while other champions had to sort of quickly be changed and retconned to make sense in a world without the League of Legends itself, and I see you over there, Sona, with your still anachronistic voice lines, Draven, for pretty much 8 years, remained largely unchanged. And this is pretty much the case with his new and updated lore as well. There really hasn't been a substantive change to Draven, simply an expansion on the things that were already there. First of all, his new lore incorporates the backstory that Draven and Darius were both given in Darius's comic, Blood of Noxus, which showed the two brothers as orphans on the streets of Basilish, a town which had recently come under Noxian occupation. They join up with the Noxian warband after Draven attempts to assassinate their commander, and from there, Darius rises in the ranks because he's a really good soldier, and Draven rises in the ranks because he's really good at killing people, eventually grows bored, and things spiral from there. Draven eventually becomes a fighter in the Reckoning Pits, which is sort of combination gladiatorial combat to settle dispute between houses and also the execution method for condemned criminals in Noxus. But because war is happening everywhere, literally all the time, not a lot of people are super excited to go to an arena and watch people play out war in miniature anymore. Now, since Draven can't find the personal glory and respect that he's looking for in the Reckoning Pits, of course, he enters a stage of sober reflection about his life choices and makes a resolution to improve himself as a person. Actually, no, I'm just kidding. He starts drinking and gambling instead. Now, Draven as a washed-up has-been is a new addition to the lore, and it changes the arc of his story quite a bit. But rather than just burn out, as you might expect him to, he is found by Swain, who sure could use a right-hand man for this little plan that he's working on. Oh, nothing major, just the complete overthrow of the entire government of the country, and oh, by the way, could you bring your brother along as well while we're at it? Now, we saw the first hints of this history between Draven and Swain when Swain was first released into the game, because he does have a couple of voice lines that allude to Draven Draven and Swain being sort of old war buddies or something like that. But whatever the case, Swain overthrows Noxus, Draven gets a whole bunch of new work executing political dissidents in the Reckoning Pits, and because he can't resist executing prisoners in flashy and show-offy ways, he manages to become the glorious executioner, attracting the kinds of celebrity and fame that he has been looking for his entire life. And here is where another new character enters Draven's lore, an enterprising and diminutive promoter of the matches in the Reckoning Pits. If you play Legends of Runeterra, you may know him as Karl, but in this lore he's not explicitly named. Karl suggests that rather than everybody just killing each other over and over again, why not kill each other and instead establish rivalries and make storylines and turn them into dramas. And he basically invents the WWE. It's wrestling. He turns the Reckoning Pits into wrestling. The fighters start developing personalities and carefully crafted backstories. They put on performative rivalries. And while people certainly still die, the spectacle in the Reckoning Pits becomes more of a drama, a show, entertainment rather than the business of killing prisoners or settling political disputes. And so from there, Draven becomes the biggest celebrity in Noxus, and his ego starts inflating exponentially day by day. And now, as the bio says, he dreams of the day when the whole world knows his name. So, to summarize, Draven's lore has remained pretty much the same as it always was, mostly having been expanded with the little story bits about how he was an orphan in Basilish and recruited into the Noxian army, became an executioner, eventually went to Seed and got all washed up before Swain found him, and introduced some substantial changes to exactly what the Reckoning Pits are in Noxus. Now, we've known for a while that the Reckoning Pits eventually became much more about entertainment. You can see Xin Shao's story for that, but Draven's lore is the first one to explicitly spell out this framing of the fights in the Reckoning Pits as basically the Runeterran version of wrestling. So while it's not exactly a huge overhaul that Draven has received, those little changes that are in there are actually really fun and interesting to me. I really like the idea of Draven as essentially a larger-than-life wrestler persona. Being the biggest heel in the world suits him pretty well already, and it adds a little bit of dimensionality to the goings-on in Noxus, and personally I find that having the Reckoning Pits functioning like a kind of UFC or wrestling makes for much more interesting storytelling opportunities than merely being a place of execution where someone goes and then they die and then their story is over. I also like the addition of the idea that Draven has had a low point in life, like he has been scraping the bottom of the barrel before and was brought up by the help of someone else who he now owes a great debt to. In his original lore, Draven only really has a relationship with Darius and not much of a relationship with the larger story or politics of Noxus. Through Swain, Draven becomes connected to all the drama within the Tripharics and all the meddling behind the scenes and all the overarching plot nature of Noxus that's also going on, despite the fact that the man himself probably couldn't care less about the political machinations of Noxus. It gives him a hook, an in, a reason to include him in stories that are about the broader politics of Noxus, but his personal disinterest in all the politicking also means that you can tell stories that don't have to revolve around the Noxus stuff. For example, you could tell a story about Draven, who, as the bio says, has dreams of the day when the whole world knows his name, maybe traveling to another continent to fight in someone else's fight pits to prove himself and spread the fame of the name of Draven across the world. I mean, do we have anyone in League? Is there anyone in League of Legends, like, at all, who would fit the description of someone that Draven could fight in order to get famous on another continent? I can't think of anyone who would be involved in gladiatorial combat on another continent. I don't know if we have one. Maybe we'll get one someday. I don't know. Riot, that sounds like a cool idea. Maybe you should look into that. So, final verdict on the Draven lore update, it's pretty good. Like, it adds a lot of new hooks for the character and a lot of new opportunities to tell stories about them, which would be very nice, except of course this is Riot Games we're talking about, and the odds of any champion having their storyline followed up on are, well, they're less than perhaps you'd like them to be. Here's hoping, though. Alistar is next up on the chopping block, and he is truly a grand old man of League of Legends, having been part of the game since the very beginning back in 2009. Over the course of that time, he's had a number of different versions of his basic bio out there, although all of them have followed more or less the same basic pattern, which goes a little something like this. Alistar is a noble Minotaur warrior, perhaps a leader of his tribe of some kind, who is defeated, deceived, or otherwise done wrong by Noxus in some way or another. He is put in chains, as you can see on his character model, and taken to Noxus to act as a pit fighter. He fights and fights and fights and fights and becomes consumed with an overwhelming bestial rage, and it seems that he's destined to end his days as an unthinking monster crushing skulls in the fighting pits, except a servant girl takes pity on him. The girl is called Aelia, and she basically decides to help Alistar break free of his confinement. Having done so, Alistar once upon a time decided to join the League of Legends as a champion to fight against the interests of Noxus and bring the abuses of the Noxian government to light. With the 2014 lore retcon, of course, removing the League of Legends itself, they basically very quickly retconned him into, oh, he's not a champion in a League of Legends, he's just a freedom fighter who, wanders around and causes trouble for Noxus. Much like with Draven's update, Alistar's update doesn't really change anything fundamental about this narrative story structure, but it expands on many of them and tries to draw a slightly richer portrait of the character who's involved. For example, it finally elaborates a little bit on what the heck Minotaurs even are in the world of Runeterra nowadays. Personally, I thought for a while that Riot would just retcon them into a kind of Vastaya, but it turns out that's not really what's going to happen. They are Minotaurs, and they are a clan and a race unto themselves, unaffiliated with any of the magic nonsense coming over from Ionia. Anyway, in the new version of the story, Alistar is a noble warrior who's famous among the Minotaurs for just being noble and good and upstanding and kind of spirit and stuff. And the Minotaurs as a civilization are organized apparently around clans, but have kept themselves largely apart from the human civilizations on their continent. They protected the trade routes to the ancient city of Son for centuries, apparently, but otherwise they attempt to stay out of the politics. Unfortunately, neutrality is one thing that an empire can't abide. So, one day, Noxus shows up with promises of inclusion in the Empire. Their emissary says that Noxus is poised to take the city of Basilish, which, hang on, that name is familiar. Oh right, that's Draven and Darius' hometown. So, Alistar's bio begins around the time when Draven and Darius are children being inducted into the Noxian army, and just like how Darius and Draven's stories are kicked off by the Noxian takeover of Basilish, apparently so is Alistar's. That's an interesting connection, isn't it? Anyway, the Noxians say that they're not going to take the city of Basilish unless they have the support of the local Minotaur clans. So wouldn't the Minotaurs please like to come to neutral grounds for negotiations? Definitely just negotiations. Definitely not anything else. Just negotiations. We're just going to talk. We're not going to betray you in any way, shape, or form. Just come. Please, bring some fruit. Many of the Minotaur clans are eager to accept the offer and join with the Noxian Empire, but Alistar is like, hang on, these guys are they conquer places and kill people. Maybe we should be a little bit careful about this. And at that summit, the larger Minotaur clans pledged themselves to Noxus because they see the advantage of being part of an empire, but Alistar says that his clan prefers to remain neutral, and while they're very flattered by the offer, they'd prefer to sit this one out. And of course, Noxus, being the respectable nation that they are, respect Alistar's wishes and leave his clan completely alone with no negative consequences whatsoever for their resistance. I'm just kidding, they take Alistar a prisoner and throw him and all of his people in the Noxian fighting pits. From here, the story plays out pretty much the same way that it does in all versions of Alistar's lore. He's taken prisoner, he's thrown in the fighting pits, he fights and fights and fights and fights, all of his people die, he becomes a rage monster who doesn't really care about anything other than killing, and then he's befriended by a young servant girl called Aelia, or Aelia. Or Ilia? I'm not really sure how Noxians would pronounce that. Anyway, she takes pity on him, sits down, talks with him, treats him like a person, which is a lovely change of pace for the Minotaur, and Alistar slowly begins to reclaim some of his personality, and eventually, Aelia, the girl, suggests a plan to help both Alistar and herself escape from their bondage. Aelia, and yeah, I'm just going to call her that, manages to get Alistar out of his cell and they flee to the docks. Unfortunately, they're pursued by Noxian soldiers, and Alistar, not being especially fond of Noxian soldiers, goes all rage mode on them and throws himself into battle, killing the lot of them. Aelia, in the meantime, unable to rescue her friend, escapes on her own. Now, remember how I said that Alistar was one of the noble warriors of the Minotaur tribe? Yeah, turns out he's got a little bit of trauma about being turned into a vicious, murderous fighting beast in the Noxian pits. It's like it wasn't a good time for him. So he feels a lot of shame about all of the killing and the murdering that he did at the behest of Noxus, so he decides to travel around the world, encouraging resistance in Noxian-held territories and fighting only on behalf of the downtrodden and the abused. And as his bio says, only when he has cleared the shame from his heart, repaying every cruelty and every kindness, will Alistar return to the mountains and leave his rage behind. And in every city he passes through, he asks after Aelia. So Alistar's lore update, all in all, doesn't really offer a lot of changes to the character. It just expands his story a little bit and gives him a little bit more personality than he used to have. Specifically, it sets up this Hulk-like conflict between the monster that he was turned into in the Noxian fighting pits and the noble warrior that he aspires to be. So there's this personal redemption arc story thing going on now, which is certainly more personality than he used to have, although personally, I don't vibe that much with the trope of the self-loathing, angry Hulk monster who's struggling to tame the beast inside. Like, I might have enjoyed him as a little bit more of an explicitly political character along the veins of Silas, like someone who has been done wrong by Noxus and whose story is about articulating a counterpoint to Noxus's might makes right kind of politics and the ways in which those things harm the downtrodden and those who are defenseless. By focusing inwards on Alistar's own personal angst about the terrible things he did when he was literally just trying to defend himself from people trying to murder him isn't necessarily bad. You can tell plenty of good stories about it. It just isn't that interesting to me personally. Speaking of telling stories about Alistar, though, it says in the bio that he travels alone, encouraging resistance in Noxian-held territories and fighting on behalf of the downtrodden and the abused. And I wonder, is there a Noxian-held territory where people are downtrodden and abused, and someone who has experience as a gladiatorial pit fighter might be able to do some good and have a reason to go there? I can't... Is there anywhere in Runeterra recently where we were told that there is like a gladiatorial fighting pit and a lot of inequality and a lot of Noxian occupation? I can't... Is there somewhere like that? You know, I don't know the lore in this game very well. I can't think of anyone, but if there were, surely would be interesting if Alistar traveled there and interacted with some of the people who are involved in that whole business. That would be a story that you could tell. Wouldn't that be fun? And that leads us on to the last bio update of the day, Jax, Grand Master at Arms. Now, Jax is as old as Alistar, from way back in the beginning of the history of League of Legends. Now, what's interesting is that Jax has kind of a similar narrative problem as Draven might have had. Draven was a gladiatorial champion designed to take part in the gladiatorial combat of the League of Legends, and Jax is much the same. In the older versions of his lore, Jax is some random nobody who's not like famous in the world, who shows up in the League of Legends and starts to fight, and very quickly proves himself to be completely unbeatable, just invulnerable, totally OP, Riot please nerf. And because the League of Legends back in the day was meant to be sort of the place where the nations of Runeterra settled their political disputes, the games and the battles in the arena do need to be competitive, and so Jax is actually in the lore, in the narrative, literally nerfed. He's basically forbidden from fighting with a real weapon and forced to use a lamppost instead, which he does, and then just keeps being a total badass and winning games all the time. So obviously when 2014 rolls around and the League of Legends itself is removed from the lore of League of Legends, Jax has a big design problem because now, why is he using a lamppost as a weapon? Like, he's called the Grand Master of Arms, but he only has one weapon, and it's not even a real weapon. That is one of the things that Jax's new lore update is trying to accomplish, along with a complete change and recontextualization of who he is, where he comes from, and what he wants. Like I said, in the old version of Jax's lore, it wasn't really clear who or what he was or where he came from, why he has 3 fingers, and why he has purple skin. That has changed. Jax is an Icathian, a survivor, perhaps a sole survivor, of that ill-fated nation that unleashed the Void in its bid to fight back the Shuriman dominance of the continent. Now, the Void being what it is, that strategy didn't work out so well for them. Yeah, Shurima got wiped out of Icathia, but then so did every other living thing that used to call that country their home. Anyway, Jax has been given a full backstory, like a history to who he was, where he came from, and why he does what he does. His full name is Syjax Kaelrinx Icathan, which, wow, that sure is a fantasy word soup. He grows up in Icathia with his father always telling him stories of how great Icathia used to be before Shurima showed up and screwed all of the things up. We had mage kings back then, which were good tyrants as opposed to the bad tyrants of the Shurimans. And the mage kings, wouldn't you know it, they had an elite guard of warriors called the Kohari. Jax, growing up with these stories, decides to dedicate himself to weapons training and becomes a very able warrior. And when Icathia tries to rebel against Shurima and unleashes the power of the Void, Jax has signed up for the Icathian army, joining the reformed Kohari, and has accumulated a number of honors to his name, among them being able to bring down a Shuriman ascended god warrior, something which is, like, by all accounts, usually beyond the means of mortal men. Anyway, the Icathian mages call the Void, everything goes straight to hell. Jax somehow manages to survive. He rides to the epicenter of the cataclysm, fully intending to end his own life in horror and shame over what has happened, but instead he finds there a magical elemental staff, a Brasier's stave, burning with powerful fire. The Icathian mages had used this weapon to try and keep the Void at bay and under control until that became impossible. Jax picks up this staff as a sign. This is the last light of Icathia, and takes it with him as he roams the world. That staff is his lamppost. Since the Icathian disaster, Jax has been roaming the world, challenging powerful and able warriors everywhere, hoping to recruit them to his side to fight against the Void with him when the next inevitable outbreak happens. We can see one of those duels in Jax's color story None Shall Pass, where he's in Demacia, blocking a bridge and challenging any warrior who wants to pass. He has somewhat predictably been kicking the ass of every single challenger until Fiora rocks up, they square up against each other, and we don't know what the outcome of that particular duel ends up being. His bio states, though, that for all the warriors that he has fought, none of them have convinced him that they can march against the coming darkness, so when the end times come and the Void attempts to consume the world, Jax has fully prepared himself to stand against it alone. So, Jax's new lore does a lot to world build for Icathia and the Void that consumed that unfortunate nation, as well as doing a little bit of world building about the tyranny of the ancient Shuriman Empire that Asir is enthusiastically attempting to revive. He has a clear backstory, a clear reason for doing what he does, and a very clear goal with his story. He's traveling all over the world seeking out able-bodied warriors because he needs someone to help him when the Void comes and tries to consume absolutely everything all over again. This is a pretty convenient story structure because it gives him a good reason to seek out pretty much every single champion on the roster who isn't a Void champion. Although it doesn't give him much of a reason to seek them out as people, he mostly wants them for their fighting skills, so he can act as a secondary antagonist or an interesting obstacle on someone else's path, but for Jax himself, the only real antagonist that he has is the Void. This obviously opens him up to interesting interactions with characters like Kai'Sa or Malzahar, but he wouldn't naturally and normally seek those characters out. No, Jax is specifically looking for fighters, warriors, people of great skill and martial ability and exceptional determination, and I wonder if there's anywhere on Runeterra where, like, you might be likely to find a concentration of really strong warriors, all of them fighting against each other to test and develop their skills and growing better and better with every single fight that they're in, and, you know, maybe being an attractive target for recruitment by some wandering grandmaster who needs people to join him for a suicide mission against the Void. I mean, I'm thinking, but I just can't come up with any place in Runeterra that would fit that description that Jax would have some kind of a reason to travel to. And I definitely can't think of two other characters who we've talked about in this video who also have reasons to travel to the same kind of place and maybe participate in some kind of story where Jax is, like, there to assess all the warriors, and maybe someone else is there to disrupt what Noxus is trying to do in the region, and maybe someone else is just there glory-seeking, and maybe there's one guy who, like, owns the whole place, and, like, these three really strong strangers throw some kind of wrench into the works of his plans, and so they all get into this huge scrap together. Some kind of story unfolds where everybody gets what they want, or maybe they don't get what they want, and something happens and they develop, and fun times are had. Like, I'm searching my memory, but I just can't think of anything. But if you guys can think of something, feel free to put it in the comments down below. So, I'm kidding around a little bit, and I may be seeing connections where there are none, but it did stand out to me that all of the characters who got an update were characters who were connected to like fighting pits and fighting tournaments and gladiatorial combat, and this update comes out right around the time when Set is also getting released. Like, that feels like they're preparing for something or trying to lay the groundwork for something to happen, but again, Riot Games is Riot Games, and even if I'm right and I'm seeing connections that were actually meant to be there, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to follow through on it, because literally anything can happen behind the scenes that derails projects like this at Riot. It has happened many times before, and it's probably going to happen many times yet. For the moment, at least these 3 champions now have substantially more fleshed out lores and backstories that might, in the future, become hooks for some kind of storytelling, but until that storytelling actually happens, as usual, I'm gonna be a cynic and not hold my breath for any of it to actually play out. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. This was a lore video for League of Legends. Wow, I can't believe I still do those. And it was fun to return to this world for a little bit after spending so much time, good lord, truly so much time in Dark Souls 2. If you have enjoyed exploring the world of Runeterra with me, please feel free to hit the like, comment, and subscribe buttons down below. It is very helpful to YouTube channels because it makes numbers go up, and numbers going up is... it's literally the only thing that YouTube really cares about. If you would like to support the channel more directly than that, then I do have a Patreon that you can sign up to for like $1 a month, and there's some rewards over there. I have some tip jars like the coffee, link down in the description, and I have a merchandise store where you can buy like physical goods and objects that you can put on your body or on your desk or, I don't know, on your head. I don't judge. And if you don't want to support me directly, believe me, I completely understand, but at the end of my videos, I do encourage everybody to support the content creators that they like generally with literally anything that they can, whenever they can, because for online content creators, $1 can be the literal same as thousands of views on a video. Those small donations matter so much more than you think, especially to small content creators or people who are just starting out. So if you have a content creator whose work you enjoy, please consider supporting them directly anytime you can with whatever you can. Anyway, if you haven't enjoyed this video, well, there is a dislike button right down below that you can click on, but if you truly desire the privilege of clicking upon the dislike button, then you must face him in single combat until death or submission. Champions, to your corners, let's get ready to rumble!